Salutations, dear reader, or if you're watching this, perhaps I should say viewer. My name is Catherine Revelo, and I am the founder of the Politics of Discretion, which, if you're watching this, you're probably already familiar with as a website dedicated to political philosophy and a little bit of creative expression. Today, I just want to sort of introduce myself, go a little bit in depth into the philosophy of the website, talk about where we're going, future projects that we hope to bring on, and just sort of have another avenue to connect more personally with our audience. I'm hoping that this will become a more regular series. I am currently a graduate student, so if things slow down a little bit on the website, it's because I'm extremely stressed out while I'm writing a thesis and attempting to single-handedly run a website at the same time. But since we're on that vein, let me give you a little bit of my background. I have undergraduate degrees in political science and journalism, and I began really as an undergraduate in college writing political opinion. And I quickly grew very disenchanted with this as a career path because if you've ever worked in opinion, or even if you just read opinion pages, you're probably familiar with the very partisan nature of opinion writing. It's a lot of defense of one side and denigration of the other. There's not a whole lot of in-depth thought into it. And in fact, generally, if you attempt to delve into any sort of deeper ideological thought in these avenues, it doesn't work that well. One, because the format is so short, and two, because it's just not what people are really looking for. So I, as someone who calls myself an intransigent ideologue, because I believe that political theory or political philosophy, whatever you want to call it, is upstream of politics, and all of my political positions are informed by ideology, and they're very rigid and they don't move. Very quickly grew tired of this. Particularly as the 2016 election rolled around, and we began to see how just completely feckless the parties are, how they attempt to, politicians claim that they hold certain positions and certain principles, but these hinge upon their position and power. Primary example being the fiscal hawks amongst the Republicans when they were in the minority in Congress, who are now close to passing a fourth short-term spending deal because they don't want to actually fix the budget or deal with deficits, which they were so opposed to a mere 2 years ago. So for me, this was just something that I couldn't deal with, and the politics of discretion was born of this, and the desire to really instill more serious thought into the political dialogue. If you've read any of the website, you will be aware that my own ideology is somewhat different from the mainstream. I am a radical individualist, and I also believe in what I term substantive idealism. And this really means that, unlike many people who see the ideal as this sort of unattainable romantic notion that exists largely in the theoretical realm, I believe that idealism is something that can be made tangible and which individuals can actually realize in their lives if they develop a cohesive set of values and apply this consistently to all areas of their life. If you want more on that, go to the discretionism part of the website, read through that. I will go more in depth into it later, but not today. So part of the website's mission is to really perpetuate this, well, perpetuate's not the right word, but to just give a platform to this perspective and to try to bring it further into the political conversation. So that's probably a good overview for now of the more serious side of the website. Another important component, which I'm currently working on developing, relates to creative expression. So for me, writing, even if it's the most formal academic writing, should not be just sort of dry and terse and mechanical. This is something that if you worked inside of media recently or academia or what have you, has become what's taught. It's, you know, move from point A to point B to point C as quickly as possible in as few words as possible. Just really make your point and move on. And that to me, I think, is really just tragic because writing and rhetoric, not in the derogatory sense that it's used now, but rhetoric in the more old style Greek sense of the word is an art form. And I think that it can add a lot to even straight up opinion writing, which is why if you read some of my opinion pieces, there's some grandiosity to it, a little bit of hyperbole. And we're working further on developing this in what I am rather tritely calling edifiction. I know that's a really bad pun on obviously edification and fiction, but the goal is to use more creative forms of expression to bring political points across. And this is something that is really very near and dear to my heart. Because I think oftentimes, anytime anything remotely political gets brought up, people immediately revert to, partisan positions and things get fraught and tense very easily, and that shuts down thought. And if you look at really good examples of certain works of fiction, like anything George Orwell has written, or I'm personally a huge fan of what Rod Serling did with The Twilight Zone, which I think is just a fantastic example of social commentary blended with the suspension of disbelief that fiction provides. I think that is a really rich avenue that can be explored in order to foster really deep and critical thought about important issues of the day, but removes some of the tension that revolves around politics. And so that moving forward is going to increasingly become a goal of the website. We're going to do less political commentary, frankly, in part just because I'm tired with it and I don't think it's that effective. Like I said, I think too easily people become defensive of their own positions and just don't engage with it. So we'll still do some of that because I will get frustrated and will go on a rant. But moving forward, we do want to do more creative stuff. Hopefully that will come out very soon. As I said, I pretty much run the website single-handedly, and I also am in grad school, so balancing time sometimes an issue, but we are working on it. And by we, I mean the website, which is me. So I think that pretty much covers that. Let's just briefly move into some political thought because I'm in the mood for it. Which, as I do more of these video podcasts, we'll do more of that and less of this exposition. But so, as I said, I'm currently working on a thesis which has to do with social contract theory, which I am not a fan of as a radical individualist because I think too often it sort of runs roughshod over minority voices, the smallest minority, and the one that I care most about being the individual. But if you read political theory, and many of you may not, and it's a little dry, so I don't blame you, which is another reason that I think that fiction is a great platform for getting these ideas across. But anyway, so if you read early American political theory and you get into Thomas Jefferson, of whom I am a huge fan, you get into the idea of ward republics, which are not unlike town halls that you may see now when politicians go home to their constituencies, or if, like myself, you grew up in New England, there are very active local town halls, which are important to, school boards and budgeting and things like that. So ward republics are really a level of federalism on the most basic level. They're very small, and the idea is that by creating this ward, which Jefferson proposed would be roughly 6 miles square, you not only locate a majority of political issues in the community so that they're solved by people who are involved in them, but you also sort of force political participation, um, because people are touched by these issues, and so they have a vested interest in the outcome and in making sure that the solution that is pursued is one that is beneficial to them. And one of the benefits that Jefferson saw to this system was that it would create a more efficacious government, meaning that there would be more harmony between the people and their leaders, not only because, in this sense, the people literally were their own leaders, but because there would be this bond between them, because they were working together to solve issues for the benefit of everyone. And I think this is a particularly interesting issue now when we have such discord in Congress and the congressional approval rating is so low. And pretty much, there's this universal feeling in this country that, politicians are just a byword for dishonesty and ineffectualness and things like that. I think it's interesting to talk about this union between politicians and their constituents, um, and to realize that in the Jeffersonian context, what binds them together has absolutely nothing to do with either personal or political ideology, but simply the act of uniting together around a particular issue and taking action to effectively solve that issue. Um, so if you think about it in that regard and you make politics not about ideology, that's an interesting proposition. On the one hand, it certainly addresses the tribalism that we see today. And I don't think tribalism is necessarily a bad thing. I don't think that political parties are inherently bad. They are a way to organize the polity and to help people who don't necessarily have time to follow political events that closely, sort of understand where they stand in the broader political discourse. But when the parties cease to become about core ideas and core platforms, and these become, things that just kind of switch out depending upon where you are in the power structure, whether you're in the minority or the majority, then parties are useless. And partisanship largely becomes a cudgel just to be people who are perceived to be unlike you. And the Jeffersonian model would some ways take some of this pressure off because its emphasis is on action and not just political action, because that is a terrible standard for political efficacy. This is one of my pet peeves when people talk about Congress is working properly because they're able to move bills forward. Well, that says nothing about the merits of the bill, whether it's constitutional or not, whether in the long term it solves a political issue that needs to be solved at that level of government. Merit as a metric for political action is just sort of thrown out the window. And that's one way in which I'm not sure that the Jeffersonian system would benefit anyone. I don't know that we simply wouldn't substitute mere action for approval just on a more local level. Certainly, under the ward system, if things go awry, these are your neighbors with whom you now have issues. So there is a little bit more pressure to actually solve political issues once and for all, and to not, abuse the system or to cheat or to lie, because these are people that you live with, that you work with, you have relationships with on a daily basis. So there's simply no way to escape it, and you don't want to alienate your community. But so that's just an interesting alternative to the system that we have now, because I think the issue of partisanship is something that's very much on everyone's mind. And again, partisanship is not a bad thing. As an ideologue or an idealist, or even an individualist, this is a worldview where you have a very specific set of ideas, and they're not necessarily going to be ideas that people around you agree are beneficial. And if you truly believe in them, you need to pursue them, and you need to learn how to rectify your personal beliefs with a world that is not necessarily tolerable to them, and to be able to be comfortable in your own self, and yet still have relationships with other people who might have different ideologies than you do. Likely you'll get a column from me on this as I'm thinking more and more about it, and it will probably be a little more coherent than what I'm saying right now. But so that's the overview of the website. As I said, hopefully this will become more of a weekly thing. Thank you very much for watching, for reading, for supporting us. Please follow us on social media. We are Politics of Discretion on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Follow us here on YouTube. And feedback is also entirely welcome. And I look forward to hearing more from you. Thanks again.